Good morning. Happy Halloween. It's Rochester today. Not exactly a spooky day with Tom Ostrom, but we'll make do. Hi, Tom. How you doing?
Hi, Andy. Fine. You?
Doing well. Doing well.
Okay.
Not exactly the finest weather for the trick-or-treaters in the forecast after 80 degrees on Tuesday.
Yeah.
Quite a change.
Yeah.
Oh, well. What's in the mailbag today?
Babylon Bee. Sources within the fundraising wing of the Trump campaign say they've raised several $1 million after Trump introduced a new catchphrase. How much would you pay not to hear Kamala talk?
Oh,
We'll have to
gosh.
defeat her in the election. A Trump staffer said that it's gotten average Americans to cough up more money. Um, and And then later they said, how much would you pay not to have to watch Tim Walz prance across the stage and wave and putting tampons in boys' bathrooms?
Oh, my
And by the way,
goodness.
some more scandal for Trump and the New York Post.
I mean, walls.
What did I say? Oh,
Trump.
thank you, Andy. A new scandal for Waltz, the Democrat vice presidential candidate. New York Post, Daily Mail, other sources that evidently a Chinese woman has stepped forward recently, said that when Tim was in China, he was teaching classes there in the 1980s, had an affair with her, and she thought he was going to marry her. And then when he left, she thought he was going to get a visa for her, and she was disgraced in her village for having the affair and embarrassed. And she just said the man has no character. She's recently come out and said that.
And she lives in Europe now. And the other part of the story, and I don't know what to make of it, but it's being reported, is that her father was a high-ranking Chinese Communist Party official.
Yes. So funny they didn't get him before he left from
But
Nevada.
this was also well before he got married to Gwen Walls.
Yeah. Okay. Um, from Nevada, Dan, he talked about his wife, and he had voted she in Nevada. She going to vote directly, and he by mail. And Chuck Muth is a journalist out there that he admires, and Muth had a series of articles about Nevada voting issues. A group refiling lawsuits to keep Nevada's voter rolls clean, and how thousands of Clark County, Nevada ballots were rejected due to missing signatures and non-matching information. And a top election official who said she was forced out of her job because she refused to accept the personnel changes wanted by the city manager's office and the clerk's office. And so trouble in Nevada. And then from Wayne, why did Biden call us garbage? We'll have more on that later in the show. And then he said Wayne said, an outstanding Supreme Court decision on non-citizen voting in Virginia.
Yep.
That's helpful. And then Gloria Romero, he said, is a former Democrat state senator and majority leader of the California State Senate. She was a Democrat. She's now a Republican supporting Trump. And then one more from Rose. Go ahead.
No, please, you first.
Okay. And then from Rose, Biden just called Trump followers garbage. How can I fit I'm a racist, fascist, deplorable Nazi and garbage on my MAGA t-shirt?
That's a good one, Rose.
That's
Thanks. She made me chuckle. That's good. I like that.
yeah, that's good.
Okay, going back to the first mailbag about the Babylon Bees joke about paying money to not hear any more speeches from Kamala Harris. And I'm being serious when I say this. I think I would be willing to pay money to
Mhm.
not see any more political ads this season. They have just been the worst of the worst, and it comes from both directions. We've always had negative ads, but it's almost exclusively negative ads now, and I'm sure I'm not the only one. It's become very tiresome. So that's my grain of salt for the day. That's it for the mailbag. We'll be back in a moment. It's Rochester Today with Tom Ostrom. I'm Andy Brownell on News Talk 1340 KROC AM and 96.9 FM. Welcome back, Rochester Today, Halloween edition. Tom Ostrom's here. I'm Andy Brownell. And Tom, what do you want to start with on the Minnesota news front?
Annie Holmquist, Opportunities for All Kids, she's an editor of that organization, and she has affiliated with executive directors and other people, and a Minnesota representative, Harry Niska, explaining to parents to get education savings accounts for students so they can go to any school system that they choose. And they said this declining statistics on education progress or lack thereof in the Twin Cities means there has to be school choice as a solution to some serious declines. 52 school districts in the Twin Cities have 37 of them have 60% or less proficiency in reading. Of the 52 school districts in the Twin Cities, 39 have 60% or less proficiency in math. And the stats just go on. And they say learning to do math and use a computer and be able to write is essential for students, and this has to be remedied.
And the one thing I would observe about the school choice issue is Minnesota, for a long time now, has had the charter school option. And while in many cases it has worked out well, there have been numerous cases of financial mismanagement in these charter schools and a lack of oversight in the way the money is being spent, because there's such a variety of charter schools out there. They're very, I guess, niche oriented. They have, charter schools to address ethnicity, charter schools to address subject matter, whether it be art or science. And some of them are apparently operated by people who are not real good at managing government funds, because they end up receiving that per pupil funding from the state of Minnesota, which of course is what the public schools object to on that issue. But there have been many other charter schools that have been very successful, so I don't want to paint with a broad brush either. What's the next topic, Tom?
People fleeing Minnesota, and one person wrote an editorial that was published in The Hill, Jacqueline Schrader. She said, after more than 50 years of calling Minnesota home, my husband Bill and I left our beloved state for Florida in 2023. We raised 7 children in Minnesota, but the events of 2020 were a tipping point. COVID policies, George Floyd riots, how Waltz mismanaged COVID and other things, school closures, the tax burden, and we miss Minnesota. She was a candidate, Jacqueline Schrader, of this article, was a candidate for state representative in the House and failed to be elected. But the title of the article, "The Land of 10,000 Fleeing Residents, Why We Left Minnesota After 50 Years."
And there have been obviously demographic data showing that 10,000 number is not a made-up number. Over the past several years, the net migration away from Minnesota has been anywhere between 10 and 20,000 people, which has not been the case in previous time spans. Minnesota has usually been a net gainer in population rather than a decliner in population. And of course, there's a lot of discussion of why that's taking place. And you and I mentioned it previously on the show, and I think that the cost of living has to be factored into that. Minnesota used to actually have a fairly um, moderate cost of living compared to a lot of other states. Not the cheapest, but not the most expensive. And we've been steadily rising up in that category, especially when it comes to housing costs. And the other part I think plays strongly in this is the crime factor, because Minnesota has always been known for its wonderful quality of life issues. And having safe communities is so central to the quality of life part of that equation. And we may still have wonderful parks and great natural environment places we can visit. But when people aren't feeling safe where they live, I think that has a big part of their decision making process if they're even considering moving away from where they live.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, metropolitan areas across the entire country are all dealing with that same crime issue. So I suspect that more suburban or rural areas are picking up where the urban areas are missing out. But even myself personally, Tom, going to the Twin Cities, I think I've said this before. We used to regularly ride the light rail, and I'm just not willing to do it anymore. And that's a dang shame, is what that is.
Yeah. Well, the light rail has had some serious crime issues on there, and that's what you're probably thinking of. Jacqueline Schroeder also says another element, and you just said it was crime and the tax burden on Minnesotans. The state now ranks, she says, sixth highest in the nation for state and local tax collections per capita.
But Minnesota's always had that reputation as a high tax state. But when it went along with that was that high quality of life factor. And I won't say that we don't have a high quality of life in many parts of Minnesota, but it's not as high a quality of life as it was even 5 to 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And you pointed out the other reason. The education system isn't functioning anywhere near as well as it used to. Minnesota used to be known for its high quality public education. You can't even argue that anymore. Yeah, it's a darn shame.
And I think the high immigration rate of youngsters who don't speak English or aren't from our culture, that divides school resources and staff into coping with those problems.
Anything else from Minnesota news?
You have commented on this often with your coverage as a news anchor of crime, and you've said that you're astonished at the young criminals, teenagers, etc. And from Minnesota News, vindicating your assessment, teenage boys arrested in Rochester over stolen car and gun incidents, and they were found in possession of guns and a gun in a vehicle. Officers sent to a location in the Twin Cities areas in a parking lot where they had a call about gunshots. They found shell casings and a knife. The suspects left in a car that they stole, and officers later found them at a filling station. And a 14-year-old boy was arrested after officers found him in possession of a stolen gun, and he's facing multiple charges. And 2 days later, a 15-year-old boy arrested after a two-vehicle crash. Officers sent to the scene. The teen driver tried to flee, but witnesses stopped him and handed him over to the police. And the car that he fled in had been stolen earlier that night. And that boy was taken to the Anoka County Juvenile Detention Center and facing multiple charges.
And those incidents seem relatively quaint when compared to the reports out of the Twin Cities of crimes committed by youngsters as young as 11 years old involving guns, stolen vehicles, drugs, and violent attacks. As I said before, I don't know how you resolve it. I don't know what you do with these offenders of that age. You can't put them in prison. They're 11 years old. I don't know. You have anything else, Tom, on that?
I think Minnesota has a juvenile detention nurse.
Yeah, but they don't take 11-year-olds.
Okay.
I mean, I think I don't know what the cutoff, but I'm pretty sure it's not 11. It might
Uh,
be 13 or 14, and even those facilities are stretched thin because there's so few of them. We used to have our own local juvenile detention center, but for budgetary reasons, and also at the time there weren't that many teenagers being referred to the center, it was eliminated. But I think in retrospect, I think that decision might have been short-sighted because there's significant cost now to take a 14-year-old and drive them all the way up to Anoka and have them processed into a facility. You have to take an officer off the street and drive them up to the Twin Cities, and they have to drive back. Now, if that youngster has a court hearing in juvenile court in Olmsted County, you have to send a law officer back up to Anoka to fetch the kid and bring them back for the hearing, unless you can do it over Zoom or, whatever video connection you might have. But sometimes they have to be done in person.
and if memory serves, I think Red Wing had a juvenile facility. I don't know if they still do.
Yeah, that's after you're convicted.
Yeah.
That's not a detention, that's an actual correctional facility.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, that's still operational. One other Minnesota thing before we go. With all the talk about election integrity and concerns about it, which, by the way, according to polls, is a bipartisan issue, Hennepin County got their hands slapped by the Minnesota Supreme Court this week because they skipped over provisions dealing with the appointment of the absentee ballot board, the group that would review absentee ballots and deal with any ballots that might be objected to for a variety of reasons: lack of signature, lack of witness, lack of identifying documentation, whatever it may be. It's supposed to be bipartisan with a list of election judges drawn from um, individuals identified by both major political parties. Well, Hennepin County didn't do it. They didn't bother to use the Republican Party list of potential candidates for this absentee ballot board, and allegedly made up a whole bunch of excuses for it. And the Minnesota Supreme Court this week said, no, 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 no. You go back and start over again, and you do it the right way and appoint a board based upon these lists provided by the parties, which is required by state election law.
Mm-hmm.
All right. We'll take a break for news then. We'll be back in a few moments after a news break with TJ right here on Rochester Today. News Talk 1340, KROC AM and 96.9 FM. It's Rochester Today. Final few minutes of the Halloween edition with Tom Ostrom. I'm Andy Brownell. Time for some international news, Tom. Take it away.
Kamala and Joe insist there were no wars on their watch during their administration. U.S. airstrikes target multiple sites in Syria, killing up to 35 Islamic State militants. They've also gone after the Houthis, who've been striking out at freighter ships on the seas in the Middle East. And the U.S. military has struck in the last week or two Islamic groups in Syria. And the U.S. Central Command said that, and not only in Syria, but joint operations against Islamic militants in Iraq. And the U.S. Central Command said the latest strikes in Syria disrupted the enemy there, and the U.S. and allied forces in the region are on the offensive. So there's more activity than one would usually read about.
Yeah, and you point out that the claim made by the Biden administration of no wars, and this isn't getting a lot of attention. Usually when you have U.S. service members engaged in combat, which is what this is, it's a pretty big headline. And there's quite a bit of discussion, and I'm not seeing a whole lot of that, as in the, once again, I'll use the term mainstream media, both electronic and print. It's getting mentioned, but it's not getting a lot of mention.
Well, I think they don't want to make Joe and Kamala look bad. Canada, Trudeau, Prime Minister, Liberal. He's way low in the polls. and even people in his party are saying we should have a secret ballot and ask him to resign. His policies on immigration have caused Canada some of the same problems that immigration overwhelmingly has caused elsewhere throughout Europe. But Canada said it will reduce its immigration acceptance and encourage some immigrants to leave the country. He's going to get tougher on the borders. The globalists are being resisted everywhere.
And it's a reduction in, I don't want to use the term quotas, but I guess that's what it is, that they have a certain percentage of the overall population that this is Canadians, the government, has targets for both permanent non-residents and temporary residents. And the new policy will significantly reduce that percentage. I think the temporary would be reduced from 6.5% of the overall population down to 5% over the next 12 to 18 months. That's a lot.
It is. And they're having crime problems and housing shortage problems because of it. And then the globalists are being resisted in Europe. Sweden is now offering $34,000 to any third world illegal who self-deports. They can go back to their nation and be quite wealthy then. And the migration minister in Sweden said, we've got to tighten our borders. And the migration minister said that after the right-wing bloc was successful in recent elections, that we have to limit immigration and crime that is caused by migrants from Syria, Afghanistan, Somalia, Iran, and Iraq. And the Prime Minister of Sweden has asked for the armed forces to help control gang violence by migrants, and because the right-wingers have taken control in Sweden, and the right-wingers have taken control in Holland. And they want, they're telling the globalists in the European community, we want to revise your rules and your requirements and your demands that we accept immigrants. We're going to close our borders. We're going to have the tough asylum policies, and we're going to rein in illegal immigration and make our borders strong. And they're going after the European Union, saying we're not going to obey your dictates anymore.
I saw that even Germany has implemented some border checks in regards to the immigration question, and that is quite a shift for Germany.
You bet.
Okay, we have to run. The next time we chat, it will be Election Day, next Tuesday morning. So
wow,
get ready. It's already here. You have a great weekend, Tom.
You too.
Thank you. It's Tom Ostrom. I'm Andy Brownell, Rochester Today, News Talk 1340, KROC AM and 96.9 FM. Good morning. Welcome back. It's Rochester Today. It's Halloween. I'm Andy Brownell with Tom Ostrom. Let's get started with national news, Tom.
Yeah, I used to mention these things anytime I gave lectures on the Civil War in class or elsewhere. And so I kind of enjoyed this article, and it always caused consternation in the class. Eric Uter, American thinker. Democrats want reparations to blacks. Given their historical record, they're the ones that should pay for it. The Democrat Party and the Civil War, they started the war. They were the slaveholders. The Republican Party was founded in Wisconsin in the 1850s as the Abolitionist Party. Abolishing slavery and emancipating slaves was their goal, and the Civil War did that. And the writer, Uter, says Democrats then, after the Civil War, sabotaged the Reconstruction period, manned the KKK, supported Jim Crow laws, opposed integration all the way up into the 1970s, and have done everything in their power then and now to divide us. And this time it's by gender, class, and political orientation. And they want to control African Americans, demanding who they should vote for, and keeping them saddled in government programs to control them. And they are responsible for so much historical destruction and damage to blacks. If there's going to be reparations, let them pay for them.
And they would argue that was the old Democrat Party, not the new Democrat Party.
Okay. Um, Arab leaders in Michigan are breaking with the Democrats to endorse Trump, and I've got a list of Arab and Muslim political leaders in Michigan, mayors and other political officials, and an article by Frida Powers, BizPac Review, and several prominent Muslim and Arab political leaders in Michigan have made it clear we aren't going to support the Democrat administration. We're going to support Trump. He came to visit us. He was honest and caring and wants to stop wars in the Middle East. His economic policies were, when he was president, and are in our best interest. And these regional wars could start World War III. We want peace. He'll end the chaos. And through strength and through negotiation, he's a man of principle. These are different, very high-ranking and well-respected political leaders in Michigan. And one of those leaders, a mayor, said, "I find Trump closer to the Bible, the Torah of the Jews, and the Quran of the Muslims than other candidates." And an MSNBC interviewer was shocked when a panel of Muslim voters, lay people, said, "There's no way we're going to vote for that Democrat ticket. We're going for Donald Trump."
It's interesting. I've seen some polling numbers specific to Michigan and the Arab and Muslim population, which is, I don't know what is it, pegged at around 200,000 in Michigan, somewhere around there. And it doesn't show Trump gaining a majority of the vote, but it does show that Kamala Harris is not getting anywhere near a majority of it. In fact, quite a few of Arab Americans living in Michigan are indicating they're opting to vote for the Green Party candidate, apparently as a protest.
Mm-hmm.
Either way, it would, I believe, in my view, harm Harris's chances of getting the electoral votes out of Michigan.
Sure.
And I think there was an assumption that they would back her.
And I think Trump should emphasize it more. The Abraham Accords that he negotiated when he was president, which brought peace and contact between Arab nations and Israel. And that was significant. Well,
so in the cases where they're not going to vote for Trump, it seems as if many of them are either not going to participate in the presidential election or vote for a third party. Interesting.
Mm-hmm. From Breitbart, I don't know if Democrats are saying this to frighten people into not voting for Trump, or if they hope for something or just predict something. But Democrat leaders are saying, brace for unrest if Donald Trump wins. Democrats are warning about that. And of course, that happened with Antifa when Trump was elected president the first time. And Democrats told the Wall Street Journal this last week. And progressives in various positions told the Journal they're dreading the prospect of Trump returning to power. They're dismayed half the country might vote for him, and they fear escalating political violence if Trump is elected. Now, I don't know if they say Republicans are going to do the violence, which hasn't been the case, or if they say a fractured nation will initiate violence. So don't vote for Trump. That's what they say, or that they're implying. And you wonder if they're having a self-fulfilling prophecy or encouraging people to be violent if Trump is elected.
Well, by arguing that the unrest would occur if Trump were the winner of the election seems to suggest that the unrest will come from the left, not the right, because why would the right be upset if Trump were elected?
Yeah, right.
Well, the other aspect of that, I was thinking about this the other day, that if we're Harris to win the election, you hear some people expressing fears of right-wing extremist violence in reaction to a Democratic victory.
Yeah.
And ironically, I think the events of January 6th have probably mitigated that threat quite a bit,
Yeah.
because some of the people who I would fear might be behind that kind of violence, theoretically, are in prison.
Yeah. And Kamala lied in her speech again. She said in her one of her last speeches that the Republicans and Trump conducted an armed rebellion on January 6th. Armed, that people were armed with weapons, with guns that went into the facilities, which isn't true. But some Democrats are saying Trump will retaliate and put people in prison if he wins. Well, that's what the Democrats have done. They've prosecuted Republicans. They put them in prison. They've banned them. They've censored them. And maybe Trump will have a victim, because in one of his recent speeches, he said Nancy Pelosi should be prosecuted for her insider trading, because her husband has made a fortune. He dumped millions of dollars of Visa stock, and he dumped other kinds of stock when he heard that congressional hearings are going to go after some of these companies. So he evidently he dumped 20,000 shares of Google stock before the Department of Justice filed their antitrust lawsuit, and Paul Pelosi exercised $1 million to $5 million dollars in options when he released stock like NVIDIA stock before Congress was set to vote on a bill on that company. And so people say, well, Nancy had nothing to do with that. It's him.
Well, obviously there have been quite a few members of Congress who have proposed new rules dealing with insider trading by members of Congress, and Nancy Pelosi has effectively blocked that legislation from moving forward, especially when she was House Speaker. But I don't know if they can prosecute her, because under current law, I think they're exempt because of their status as members of U.S. Congress, which I think most people think is outrageous.
No.
But whether or not she could actually be prosecuted, I don't know. But I think it would be common sense that those same insider trading rules that apply to everyone else be applied to Congress.
Sure. They're immune from prosecution for anything they say or do on the Senate floor. But yeah, these other things are problematic. And Kamala I was listening to her latest speech, and she's such a hypocrite. She preaches unity. We have to stop name calling. And then in the same speech, she's calling Trump a fascist, a Nazi, a danger. So she does name calling while she's telling us we'll bring unity and we'll stop the name calling, and says things that are a threat to Trump by calling him such a threat. And then before she even speaks, recently, President Biden came out and trashed Trump voters, and that comedian,
Bill Tony,
his Trump rally, had his statement about garbage floating. Well, Joe Biden said the only garbage I see floating out there is his supporters. Well, that's half the American voters. His supporters are garbage. Well, the Democrats are trying to tamp that down and saying he didn't mean that. He meant something else. But the people who say we have to stop the name calling, that name call in the very speeches they say they should stop.
It is like a bad Hollywood movie in a lot of ways, this entire campaign season. It's for many Americans a nightmare of two really not ideal choices. But we're forced to pick or not participate, which has its own repercussions. But Biden, not Biden himself immediately, but the White House. Oh, no, he was talking about the comedian and the comedian's followers, which I find a little bit implausible because he doesn't have that many followers. And apparently Biden granted this a conference call, news conference, at the same time Kamala Harris was on the ellipse delivering what was supposed to be her, you know, closing arguments for her case to be president of the United States, which is odd to say the least, and opens up a whole nother set of questions as to what was President Biden doing. Yeah, they've got them. The campaign has got themselves into a bit of a pickle with this one because um, looking back in 2016 when Hillary Clinton made the deplorables comment,
Yeah.
and the backlash from that very well might have cost her the election.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
this one might even be stronger than deplorables, calling, as you pointed out, according to the polls, half of the American people supporting Trump, and to say that they're garbage, and then to backpedal immediately from it. But at the same time, both Kamala Harris and Governor Walz using the rhetoric of labeling supporters of Donald Trump and Donald Trump as fascists and Nazis.
Yeah.
I don't I don't understand how they think that that's going to work for them.
No, I don't either. And Biden stepped on Kamala in a previous speech too. Just before she was to speak, he came out and said some nasty things that really would hurt Kamala. And some conspiracy theorists and some Democrats say that Biden is trying to sabotage her and make her look bad. And so she loses, so he can say, see, I would have won, because he's still angry that Pelosi and others told him to step down or else. So some think he's doing that on purpose. Others think he's just uncontrollable, nothing to see here.
Nothing to see. Well, even the quote unquote mainstream press has quoted aides to President Biden who say he often expresses regret over his decision to bow out of the race. So that's something to ponder as well. Okay, we do need to take a break before we run out of time. We will be back in a moment with more Rochester Today on News Talk 1340, KROC AM and 96.9 FM.